Don't spill it, little mouse, unless you want them to laugh louder. The wine trembled in Elena Whitmore's hands before it ever touched the crystal glass. The ballroom stretched endlessly around her. Polished marble floors reflecting chandeliers the size of carriage wheels, their golden light too bright, too exposing. Every laugh felt sharper under it, every whisper louder. She kept her eyes down, just like she'd been taught. Omegas like her were not meant to be seen, only to serve. The fabric against her skin scratched with every movement, a thin, worn dress that had once been gray but now looked like the color of dust. Around her, silk whispered and jewels caught the light. Noble daughters glided past in gowns worth more than everything Elena had ever owned. "Careful," one of them said, not even looking at her as she stepped aside. "That tray costs more than you do." Laughter followed, soft at first, then louder as others joined in. Elena's fingers tightened around the tray, her knuckles pale, but she didn't stop moving. 12 steps to the next table. Keep breathing. Don't trip. Don't look up. The music swelled, violins and low drums echoing through the vast hall, marking the opening of the Moon Festival. Tonight, the Alpha King would choose his first dance. Everyone knew what that meant. One dance could change a life. One glance could crown a Luna. But not for someone like her. "Hey," another voice called, sharper this time. A noble girl with hair pinned high like a crown blocked Elena's path, her lips curved in something too perfect to be kind. "You missed a spot." Before Elena could respond, the girl tipped her own glass, letting a ribbon of deep red wine spill down Elena's sleeve. Gasps flickered through the nearby crowd, followed by laughter, louder now, bolder. "Oh no," the girl said lightly. "Look what you've done." Elena froze. The liquid soaked into the thin fabric, cold at first, then clinging. For a second, her chest tightened so hard she couldn't breathe. "Not again. Not here." "Clean it," someone said. "On your knees." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Around her, people turned, watching, waiting. Elena lowered herself slowly, the marble cool beneath her palms as she set the tray aside. The music didn't stop. The laughter didn't stop. It blended into the rhythm, as if humiliation was just another part of the evening's entertainment. She reached for the hem of her dress, pressing it against the spill, trying to blot the stain before it spread further. Her hands trembled, but she forced them still. Just clean it. Just disappear. But then, something flickered. A faint warmth beneath her skin, pulsing from her fingertips into the marble. So soft it could have been imagined. So brief no one noticed. No one except her. Elena stilled, her breath catching. The warmth faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the echo of it behind. Strange. Wrong. She swallowed, pushing the feeling down, burying it where everything else went. Not now. Not ever. Above her, the grand doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. The music faltered, just for a heartbeat. Then silence fell, not the soft silence of conversation ending, but something heavier, like the entire room had taken the same breath and held it. Elena didn't look up. She knew better, but she felt it anyway. The shift in the air, the weight, the presence that made even laughter afraid to exist. The Alpha King had arrived. Elena stayed on her knees even as the silence deepened, her fingers still pressed against the marble, as if finishing the task might make her invisible again, as if the moment could pass over her like a shadow and leave no mark behind. But the air had changed, and she felt it in the tightness of her chest, in the way every breath seemed to hesitate before it came, in the way the room no longer belonged to laughter or music, but to something far more absolute, something that did not need to speak, to be obeyed. And slowly, against every instinct she had learned, she lifted her eyes just enough to see the reflection in the polished floor, a dark figure framed by the open doors, tall and still, his presence cutting through the golden light like winter through autumn. King Adrian Blackwood did not rush. He did not announce himself. He simply stepped forward, and the world rearranged itself around him. Nobles lowered their gazes. Conversations died mid-word. Even the musicians seemed to forget their instruments for a breath too long, and Elena felt it then, not fear exactly, but awareness, sharp and undeniable, like standing too close to the edge of something vast and unknowable. She dropped her gaze again immediately, heart pounding, reminding herself who she was, where she belonged, not there, never there. Just a servant in a borrowed dress that barely held together. Just an Omega with nothing to offer and everything to hide. Get up. Someone hissed near her. But it was not a command meant to help. It was urgency wrapped in embarrassment, as if her presence on the floor was suddenly inconvenient now that he was watching. Elena pushed herself to her feet too quickly, the world tilting for a second as blood rushed to her head. She steadied the tray with trembling hands, trying to remember how to breathe, how to move, how to disappear again. But it was too late for that. She could feel it without looking. The weight of a gaze that did not pass over her like the others, did not dismiss her, did not ignore her. It lingered, and that was worse, far worse, because being seen meant being known, and being known meant being judged. She turned slightly, just enough to step out of the center of the floor, to retreat into the edges where shadows gathered, but the path closed before her, not by walls, but by people who suddenly did not want to be the ones in the way. They shifted, subtly, instinctively, creating a space that drew a line straight to her, and her breath caught again as the realization settled in. He was not just walking through the room, he was walking toward her. No, that could not be right. There were dozens of noble daughters waiting, dressed in silk and expectation, each one more suitable, more visible, more everything than she could ever be. This was coincidence, nothing more. She lowered her head further, hoping that if she did not meet his eyes, if she did not acknowledge the moment, it would pass her by. But the footsteps did not change direction. They grew closer, measured and certain, until they stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence against the chill of the hall, close enough that the silence around them became something else entirely, something fragile, something waiting. Elena's grip tightened on the tray until it nearly slipped from her fingers. She forced herself to hold still, to remain small, to give him no reason to notice her beyond what he already had. But then she heard it, not loud, not commanding, just a single breath of a voice that carried more weight than any shout. Look at me. And it was not a demand that could be ignored. Elena's breath caught in her throat as the words settled over her, not loud, not sharp, but impossible to ignore. And for a moment she did not move, her body caught between instinct and something deeper, something she could not name, because no one had ever asked her to be seen before, not like this, not in a way that felt less like a command and more like a quiet certainty. Her fingers trembled against the edge of the tray as she slowly lifted her gaze, inch by inch, until the world that had always existed above her finally came into view, and then everything else seemed to disappear. The chandeliers, the nobles, the music waiting to return, all of it faded into something distant and unimportant. Because he was there, standing only a few feet away, his presence not overwhelming in the way she had feared, but steady, grounded, as if the entire room had been built around him, and she had simply never noticed until now. His eyes were not cold as the stories claimed, not distant or cruel. They were focused, intent, and unmistakably fixed on her, not past her, not through her, but on her, as if she were the only person in the room worth seeing. And that made her chest tighten in a way that felt almost painful, because it did not make sense. None of this made sense. She lowered her eyes again instinctively, the habit too deeply carved into her bones to resist. "I am sorry, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath, already stepping back, already trying to retreat into the safety of invisibility. "I will move out of your way." But the space behind her did not open, and the path she expected to find was no longer there. The crowd had shifted without her noticing, closing off her escape, and when she tried to step to the side, his voice came again, softer this time, but somehow stronger. "Stay." And the single word held her in place more effectively than any force ever could. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs, each beat louder than the last, as she forced herself to look up again, just enough to understand. Just enough to survive the moment without making a mistake. His gaze had not changed, not softened, not hardened. It remained steady, deliberate, as if he were searching for something and had already found it. And then she realized what had drawn his attention. His eyes shifted slightly, not away from her, but downward, to her hands, to the faint stain of red still clinging to her skin, to the place where warmth had flickered only moments before. Her breath caught again as a quiet fear slipped in, not of him, but of being exposed. Of whatever that strange, fleeting light had been. She curled her fingers slightly, trying to hide it, but it was too late for that. He had seen enough, and something in his expression changed, not in a way the others would notice, but she felt it, a subtle shift, recognition, not of her face, not of her name, but of something deeper, something that reached past the surface she had spent her life trying to shrink. And then, without warning, he stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, close enough that the distance between who she was and who he was should have felt impossible, but did not. And slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand toward her, not to take the tray, not to dismiss her, but palm open, steady, waiting. "You have been standing on the edges all night," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for those closest to hear. "Come stand where you belong." And for a moment, Elena forgot how to breathe. Elena stared at his hand as if it did not belong to the same world she lived in, as if accepting it would break something fragile and invisible that had kept her safe all these years, because this was not how stories like hers went, not for girls who served in silence, not for Omegas who learned early that attention only led to pain. Her pulse echoed in her ears, loud and uneven, as every instinct told her to step back, to lower her head, to refuse in the only way she knew how, by disappearing. "Your Majesty," she managed, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. I am not meant to stand there." The words felt small the moment they left her, like they belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone who had never questioned the place assigned to her. But his hand did not lower, did not withdraw. It remained where it was, patient, certain, as if time itself had slowed to wait for her answer. And around them, the silence stretched tighter, the nobles watching now not with amusement, but with something sharper, something uncertain. Whispers began to stir at the edges of the room, soft but urgent, disbelief carried in every breath. Why her? Why him? Why this moment? Elena could feel their eyes pressing against her skin, heavier than any words they had thrown at her before, and for a second, she almost gave in, almost let the weight push her back into the shadows where she belonged. But then she remembered the warmth, that brief, impossible flicker that had come from her own hands, something she had hidden, something she had buried, something that had never once been acknowledged by anyone, until now, until him. Her fingers curled slightly, then loosened, as if testing whether they still belonged to her. And slowly, before she could lose her nerve, she shifted the tray to one hand, the movement unsteady but deliberate. Her other hand hovered in the space between them, not quite reaching, not quite retreating, suspended in a moment that felt too large for her to control. His gaze did not waver. It held hers with a quiet intensity that did not demand, did not force, but invited. And that was what unsettled her most, because she had never been invited to anything before, not truly, not as herself. Her breath came in shallow, uneven pulls as she lifted her hand the rest of the way, placing it into his. The contact was immediate and undeniable, warmth spreading through her skin, not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady, like a heartbeat that did not belong only to her anymore. A soft gasp escaped someone nearby, then another, and the whispers grew louder, no longer hidden, no longer careful. "In Omega? In rags?" He cannot be serious. But he did not react to them, did not even glance away. His attention remained on her as his fingers closed gently around hers, firm enough to anchor her, gentle enough not to frighten her away. And then, with a single, fluid motion, he stepped back, guiding her forward, out of the place she had been trying to disappear from, and into the center of the ballroom where the light was brightest, where everyone could see, where there was nowhere left to hide. Elena's breath caught again as the space opened around them, the marble floor stretching wide beneath her feet, the chandeliers reflecting in endless patterns above. And for the first time in her life, she was not standing at the edge of it. She was standing in the middle, beside him, and the world felt different here, sharper, clearer, as if something inside her had shifted simply by being seen. The musicians hesitated, waiting, unsure, until he gave the slightest nod, and the music returned, softer at first, then building, wrapping around them like a current she could not escape. His hand moved to guide her, steady and certain, and when he spoke again, his voice low enough that only she could hear, it carried something she had never expected to find. Not command, not obligation, but quiet truth. "You were never meant to kneel," he said, and Elena felt something inside her begin to rise. The music wrapped around them like a living thing, soft at first, then steady, guiding each step she did not know she could take. Elena's body moved before her mind could catch up, her feet following the subtle pressure of his hand, as if they had done this 100 times before, though she had never danced in her life. Not like this, not under light that felt too bright, too revealing. Every movement felt like it belonged to someone else, someone braver, someone who was not afraid of being seen. Her breath came uneven at first, her chest tight with disbelief, but his grip remained constant, not pulling, not forcing, simply there, a quiet anchor in the center of everything that felt uncertain. "Just follow," he murmured, his voice low, steady, and somehow it cut through the noise in her head, through the whispers that still lingered at the edges of the room, through the memories that told her she did not belong here. She focused on that voice, on the rhythm beneath her feet. One step, then another, her hand in his, her other resting lightly where he guided it, and slowly, impossibly, the trembling began to ease. The room did not disappear, but it softened, the sharp edges of judgment dulling just enough for her to breathe. And for the first time, she lifted her gaze without fear, meeting his eyes fully, and what she found there was not pity, not amusement, but something steadier, something that made her chest ache in a way she did not understand, something that felt like recognition, as if he had been waiting for her long before this moment existed. Around them, the crowd had not recovered. Their silence had shifted into restless murmurs, disbelief turning into tension. The noble girl who had spilled the wine stood frozen at the edge of the floor, her perfect composure cracked, her eyes fixed on Elena with something that was no longer mockery, but something closer to unease, because this was not how things were supposed to unfold, not in a world where rank decided worth, not in a place where someone like Elena should have remained invisible. And yet here she was, moving across the floor beside him as if she had always belonged there. Elena felt it then, not just in the way people looked at her, but in the way the air itself seemed to shift around her. That same warmth from before flickered again, stronger this time, rising from her chest down into her arms, into the hand he held. She gasped softly, her steps faltering for just a second, but he did not let her fall out of rhythm, his grip tightening just enough to steady her, his gaze sharpening slightly as if he felt it too, as if whatever stirred within her was not hidden from him. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly, not accusing, not surprised, simply certain. And Elena swallowed, her pulse racing as the warmth pulsed again, brighter, clearer. Like something waking after a long sleep, she did not know what to say, did not know how to explain something she barely understood herself. So she shook her head slightly, even as the truth burned through her, because admitting it felt dangerous, felt like stepping into something she could not control. But his expression did not change, not disappointed, not doubtful, only patient, as if he had already accepted the answer she could not give. The music swelled around them, rising into something fuller, something undeniable, and as he guided her into another turn, the light above seemed to catch on her skin differently, reflecting not just from the chandeliers but from her, faint, almost invisible, but there, a shimmer that did not belong to fabric or jewels. A few people closer to the floor noticed, their whispers cutting through the room again, softer this time, edged with something new, not ridicule, not disbelief, but something closer to wonder. And Elena felt it all at once, the shift, the fragile, impossible change. She was no longer the girl on her knees, no longer the shadow at the edge of the room. She was here, in the center, seen, chosen, and as his hand guided her closer, his voice brushed against her ear once more, calm and certain. "You are not what they told you." And for the first time, Elena felt the possibility that he might be right. The warmth did not fade this time. It deepened, steady and undeniable, spreading from her chest through her arms and into her fingertips where his hand held hers. And Elena felt it as clearly as she felt her own heartbeat, a quiet rhythm rising beneath her skin as if something long buried had finally decided to breathe. Her steps slowed for just a fraction of a second, Not enough to break the dance, but enough for him to notice. Because of course he did. His attention never wavered, not even as. The entire ballroom watched them with a mixture of disbelief and something far more uncertain. "Do not fight it," he said softly, his voice low enough that only she could hear, and the words settled into her like a truth she had always known but never dared to accept. Elena swallowed, her throat tight, because fighting was all she had ever done, fighting to stay small, to stay unseen, to survive in a world that had no place for someone like her. But this felt different. This was not something pressing down on her. It was something rising up, something asking to be acknowledged, and that terrified her more than anything else, because if she allowed it, if she let it exist, then everything she believed about herself would have to change, and she did not know if she was strong enough for that. The music carried them into another slow turn, his hand guiding her with a certainty that never faltered, and as she moved, the faint shimmer that had begun beneath her skin grew just a little brighter, not enough to draw the eye of the entire room, but enough that those closest could no longer ignore it. Whispers spread again, quieter now, less certain. "Do you see that? It cannot be. And Omega does not." The words trailed off, unfinished, because no one wanted to say it out loud. No one wanted to give shape to something that did not fit the rules they had always lived by. Elena heard them, every word, every doubt. And for a moment the old fear tried to return, tried to pull her back into the version of herself that would shrink and hide. But his hand tightened slightly, grounding her, reminding her she was not alone in this moment. And when she looked at him again, she saw it clearly, not confusion, not hesitation, but recognition, as if what was happening was not a surprise to him at all, as if he had expected it, as if he had been waiting for it. And that realization sent a different kind of shiver through her, one that was not fear, but something closer to awe. "Why me?" she whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it, because she needed to understand, needed to anchor herself to something real before the moment carried her too far. His gaze softened, just slightly, not losing its intensity, but gaining something else, something quieter, more personal. "Because you were never invisible," he said, and the words struck deeper than anything else that had happened that night, because they challenged everything she had been told, everything she had believed. Elena's breath caught again, her chest tightening as the warmth surged once more, stronger now, brighter, and this time it did not stay contained. It reached outward, a faint glow brushing against the fabric of her dress, catching the light in a way that could no longer be dismissed as imagination. A collective hush fell over those nearest to them, the whispers dying mid-breath as eyes widened, as certainty cracked and something new took its place, something uncertain, something that did not yet have a name. And Elena felt it all at once, the shift in the room, the shift in herself, the fragile edge of something she could either step into or turn away from. And for the first time, she did not look down, she did not shrink, she held his gaze, her hand steady in his, and let the light remain. The light did not fade when she held it. It answered her, growing steadier beneath her skin as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to be acknowledged. And Elena felt it with a clarity that left no room for doubt. It was hers. It had always been hers. She had just never allowed herself to see it. The realization settled into her chest like a quiet, rising strength, fragile but undeniable. And for the first time the weight of the room did not press her down. It lifted her. The whispers that once cut into her now faltered, shifting in tone, uncertainty replacing certainty. "That is not possible," someone murmured, but no one laughed this time. No one dared, because what stood before them no longer fit the shape of their assumptions, and they could feel it, even if they did not understand it. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the moment had become something larger than any of them. Elena's steps no longer stumbled. They flowed, guided not just by him but by something within her that finally felt awake. Each movement carried a quiet confidence she had never known, and though her dress was still worn, still stained, it no longer defined her. It no longer held the same power over how she was seen, because the light beneath her skin drew the eye in a way fabric never could. King Adrian did not look surprised. He did not look uncertain. He watched her as if this was exactly what he had expected, as if every doubt the room held had never existed for him at all. And when the music carried them into a slower turn, his hand shifted slightly, steadying her as she moved closer, the distance between them narrowing not in pressure, but in understanding. "You see it now," he said quietly, not a question, but a confirmation. Elena swallowed, her heart still racing but no longer from fear, her voice steadier when she answered, "I feel it." And that was enough. More than enough, because the moment the words left her, the warmth surged again, brighter than before, spilling outward in a soft glow that brushed against the edges of the floor, not blinding, not overwhelming, but undeniable. A collective inhale swept through the crowd, not shock alone, but something deeper, something that carried the first hint of respect, the kind that did not come easily, the kind that had to be earned or revealed. And Elena felt it, the shift in how they looked at her. Not as something lesser, not as something to ignore, but as something they did not yet understand and could no longer dismiss. The noble girl who had mocked her earlier took a step back without realizing it, her posture no longer confident, her expression uncertain, because whatever power she had relied on before did not seem to matter here, not in the presence of something that did not follow the same rules. The music reached its peak, swelling into something full and resonant, and as King Adrian guided Elena into the final turn, the light responded, pulsing once, twice, like a heartbeat shared between them. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that this was not an accident, not a whim, not a mistake. This was something chosen, something real, something that could not be undone by whispers or doubt. And when the music softened into its final note, he did not release her immediately, his hand still holding hers as the silence returned, heavier now, charged with everything that had just changed. His gaze met hers, steady and unwavering, and though his voice was quiet, it carried through the stillness with absolute clarity. "Now they will remember your name." And Elena realized, with a certainty that settled deep within her, that she was no longer afraid of being seen. The silence did not break immediately. It lingered, stretched thin across the ballroom as if no one dared to be the first to move. The last note of the music still hanging in the air like a question that had not yet been answered, and Elena stood in the center of it, her hand still in his, her pulse steady now in a way it had never been before, the light beneath her skin no longer flickering but settled, quiet and present, like something that had finally found its place. And for a moment she simply breathed, feeling the weight of everything that had changed settle around her without crushing her, because it did not feel like pressure anymore. It felt like space, like possibility. And then the room exhaled, not in laughter, not in mockery, but in something far more restrained, voices rising cautiously, uncertain, as if everyone was trying to understand what they had just witnessed without saying the wrong thing. "Who is she?" someone asked, not with disdain, but with genuine confusion. "Elena." Another voice answered, quieter, hesitant, as if the name itself carried a new weight now. And Elena felt it, the way her name moved through the room, no longer ignored, no longer dismissed, but repeated, considered, remembered. She had spent her entire life trying to avoid attention, and now it found her without effort, without permission, and yet it did not feel like something to fear anymore. King Adrian released her hand slowly, not abruptly, not as a dismissal, but as a transition, as if the moment between them had simply shifted into something else, something that did not require constant contact to exist. And as his hand fell away, Elena felt the absence of it immediately, not as loss, but as awareness, as if part of her had learned what it meant to be held steady and would never quite forget it. He turned slightly then, not away from her, but toward the room, his presence expanding once more to fill the space he commanded so effortlessly, and the murmurs quieted again, not out of fear, but out of instinct, because when he chose to speak, people listened. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to. "You have all seen enough to understand," he said, his tone even, controlled, but carrying an edge of finality that left no room for argument. "What stands before you is not defined by what she wears, nor by what you believed her to be." His gaze swept across the crowd, not lingering, not challenging, but acknowledging, and Elena felt the shift ripple outward, the quiet correction of everything that had been assumed about her, everything that had been said, without thought, Respect is not granted by rank alone, he continued, his voice steady. It is revealed by truth. And the words settled into the room with a weight that could not be ignored. No one spoke against it. No one dared, not because they were afraid, but because something in the moment had made resistance feel meaningless. Elena stood beside him, no longer shrinking, no longer trying to disappear, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady, and for the first time, she did not feel out of place in the center of the room. She felt anchored there, as if she had stepped into something that had always been waiting for her. The noble girl who had mocked her earlier lowered her eyes, not dramatically, not with apologies spoken aloud, but with a subtle shift that carried more meaning than words, and others followed, one by one, small gestures, slight inclinations of the head, acknowledgments that would have been unthinkable only moments before. Elena noticed them all, not with triumph, not with pride, but with a quiet understanding that this was not about them anymore. It was about her, about who she chose to be now that she no longer had to hide. And as she stood there, the light within her steady and warm, she realized something that settled deep and certain in her chest. This was not the end of the moment. It was the beginning of everything that would follow. The room did not return to what it had been. It could not. Something too fundamental had shifted, and even as conversations slowly resumed, they carried a different tone, quieter, more careful, as if everyone understood that the boundaries they had trusted were no longer as fixed as they once believed. Elena felt it. In the way people looked at her now, not with pity, not with dismissal, but with a kind of measured attention that had weight to it. And though it should have felt overwhelming, it did not, because she was no longer standing in it alone. King Adrian remained beside her, not as a shield, not as a declaration, but as a presence that did not need explanation. His silence spoke just as clearly as his words had, and it gave her something steady to stand on as the moment unfolded into something new. She became aware of the small details again, the polished floor beneath her feet, the soft echo of footsteps returning, the distant murmur of voices finding their place again. But everything felt sharper now, more defined, as if she had stepped into a clearer version of the same world, one where she could finally see the space she occupied without shrinking from it. She glanced down briefly at her dress, still worn, still marked, unchanged in every visible way, and yet it no longer felt like a symbol of who she was. It was just fabric, nothing more, because what had changed was not what she wore, but how she stood within it. Her shoulders no longer curved inward, her breath no longer shallow. She lifted her gaze again, meeting the eyes of those around her without flinching, and one by one, they held that gaze for a fraction longer than they would have before, not out of challenge, but out of recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that did not need to be spoken aloud, and in that exchange, she felt something settle into place inside her, something solid, something real. King Adrian turned back toward her then, his expression unchanged, steady, but there was something in his eyes that felt almost like approval, not for what she had done, but for who she had chosen to become in that moment. "This will not be easy," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her, and she understood immediately what he meant. Because moments like this did not erase the past, they did not rewrite every belief overnight. There would be questions, resistance, doubt that lingered in places where change moved slowly, but for the first time, that did not feel like something to fear, it felt like something to face. Elena nodded slightly, her voice calm when she answered, "I know." And she did, not in detail, not in certainty, but in the simple truth that whatever came next, she would not return to who she had been before this night, because that version of her had been built on silence and invisibility, and both had been broken, not by force, but by something far more powerful, by being seen and choosing not to look away. A faint warmth still lingered beneath her skin, no longer surging, no